Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another exciting podcast. I am here with my awesome co-host, Sanan. Hey, Sanan, how are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I am splendid. And we have an awesome guest today with us, our very good friend, Patrick, who works for Microsoft. Hey, Patrick, how are you today?
Hey, I'm doing well. How are you all this afternoon? So my role at Microsoft is a senior product manager with the Identity Customer Experience program team. And so basically, what my team does is we engage with customers that have already purchased, usually. So customers that have already own entitlements and stuff, and they don't know what to do with what they own, right? So my team comes in and helps give them the base level layers that they need in order to start utilizing whatever features in the identity stack that they've purchased and want to use. So that
Fantastic.
can include things like, MFA, conditional access, identity governance, which is what we're here to talk about today, but
Yeah.
a lot of other things.
Perfect segue. I love it. We are talking about identity governance. We have
We
been talking
are.
about identity governance for the last few weeks. We had a fantastic set of podcasts, videos, and blogs. And we also have a fantastic competition until the 13th. If you haven't had a chance to participate, you can still go and learn for free on MS Learn. There's a course. Shannon, do you want to plug that in?
Sure. Yeah. So the course itself is part of the SE 300 certification path. And if you go through and you complete it and you fill out a questionnaire, you'll get a discounted exam voucher and a Credly badge that you can share out with your communities.
Exactly. Lots of initiatives to help you get up to speed with identity governance. We know that a lot of customers out there have the appropriate licensing and they just don't know how to use it. That's why we have Patrick here. Tell us a few things from the field and how he works with customers. So, Sam, do you want to take the first question?
Sure. When you're out with customers, how do you define identity governance when they first come to you and they start asking questions?
Yeah, so when we talk to customers about identity governance, it's basically like a story about their entire user lifecycle, right? It's about how users are created, how users are get the permissions that they need, how they're retired, how they're monitored, stuff like that. And you when you talk about identity governance in general, you're basically talking about several different features that boil up into what we call identity governance, right? And the main ones that we talk about as far as these conversations is access reviews, which I know you talked about, privileged identity management, been covered as well, and entitlement management. Giving people access to the things they need whenever they need it, as far as like for their job and their main role is entitlement management, and then PIM, of course, is provisioning to higher elevated permissions on the fly. And then access reviews is monitoring all of that and making sure that the people who got access to resources or roles or external users you invited in still need that access and are good to go. And it's telling the whole, it's basically that whole life cycle, right? And somebody has no access and then they go to a role and they need this access, and then they go to maybe they move roles, right? And you have to monitor, do they still need that? What do they need to get and stuff? And a lot of people do this on premises now with groups, right? A lot of people, you make your user on the group on AD and you clone a user, right? And that's how you've done your entitlement management previously, right? You just like, hey, this user's in the same org, I'm just gonna right click copy, rename it, right?
So simple.
Yeah,
So
So
simple.
simple,
so
and yet
simple.
so bad.
And you lose control of that over time. And the same thing happens in the cloud, right? You make the majority of our customers still make their users on premises. They still sync them to AD. They still do on premises resource access that way. But when it comes to Azure AD, um, this is a great opportunity for your organizations to go in and say, hey, this is a way to do it differently, and be more proactive and
Yes.
better monitoring with what we're doing.
Makes
So
sense.
that's basically the nutshell pitch that we give to customers.
I love the cloning account. It just brought fond memories of me joining marketing, right? On my first day, obviously, I need to get access to resources. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm sitting down with an older member in the team who's been at Microsoft for about 12, 13 years. And I say, what do I need access to? What groups do I need to join? He gave me a blank copy of all his group memberships from all the 12 years that he was at Microsoft. And I started applying to join all
Yep.
these groups without knowing what these groups are
Yeah.
doing and what access I was getting into, just
Whoops.
trying almost like trial and error. And then I would try different websites I had to get access to and see if that worked or not. I wouldn't be surprised if that's the de facto mode of operation for many enterprises. Therefore, being able to switch this and say there's a much better way to do it and there's a much better way to protect, especially privileged access, is very, very important. Do you have any stories from working with customers that can help listeners understand the value prop of identity governance and how they can leverage that on the Microsoft platform?
Yeah, so usually when we engage with customers, they're coming in to solve scenarios, and my team, what I like to do is I like to pitch to customers that, like, I'm here to teach you basically the art of the possible. Right, a lot of people just don't know what they purchased, and you need a walkthrough, and this is how the basic setup and stuff works. So in the art of the possible, we talk with customers about what are your business requirements for guest user access. What are your requirements? What does your new user orientation look like? Right, we go through those conversations with all the customers, and we kind of try to figure out what they're doing, so that we can kind of mold that into the process that we want to see going forward. And it's never an easy like switch, right? You just can't flip it overnight. People have been doing things the way they've been doing things for 20 years, right? So it's hard to back up. So when most of the customers that we engage all follow a very specific, not say specific, but a very similar life cycle into onboarding to identity governance, and that is, they usually almost always come in wanting control over their guest user access. And basically, when you look at like what's happened the last couple of years as far as COVID goes, it's really impacted the way a lot of organizations work. Like, you used to have people that would have meetings, and they'd have them on site, right? And you'd arrange like a 2-day seminar, and people would come in and they come on site. They wouldn't need guest user access, right? They just come into the building. But now, doing it via Teams, right? And so you're inviting people into sales pitch meetings or design meetings or something like that, if it's a vendor, right? So a lot of that has built up over the past couple of years, and people started looking at their Azure AD users, and they're like, this is just going out of control. Where are all these users coming from? Do they still need access? Stuff like that. So that's almost overwhelmingly the vast majority of customers that we engage with initially want to get a handle on that. And it's a combination of doing an access review targeting guest users, which we can talk a little bit about later, and then cross-tenant access policies, which is a brand new feature that we're not going to deep dive into here, but you can actually go and like limit where your users can go to as far as another tenant, and the users that can be invited in.
Nice.
And access packages, whereas like if we have a guest and we have like a road show or something that we're doing virtually, this is our access package, and we're just going to put it out publicly. You sign up for it, and then you sign up for it, and you get this permission to our team site for a week while we hold the roadshow, and then you're gone. So those are the most common scenarios that I've seen like out in the wild as far as customers go.
Nice.
Now, are there any gotchas, right? So I always think that there's always great things, but there might be some gotchas that, customers might want to just be careful of if they're listening to, and maybe they want to get started today. Is there anything that you can think of within the customer base that you've worked with?
Yeah, typically speaking, a lot of customers, you have people that come in and the executive levels typically want to do everything. Right. They're very
boil
high
the ocean.
level.
Right.
Boil the ocean. Right. But when you get down to it, it's a very drastic change from just the way that they're operating now, which, and starting small is always the best advice that we give customers. And it's not one that, senior executive likes to hear all the time. But the bottom line is that the less that you impact your users, the better the acceptance is going to eventually be, right? So we find that like a slower buildup is better than a switch.
Yeah.
And I have a saying that I picked up from an ex-colleague of mine, Drew. If he's listening, he probably thinks I never listened to him. I picked it up from him. I had never heard it before, but it's don't let perfect be the enemy of good. And
I like that. I like that a lot.
That's the message I send to customers. It's like, right now you have no data, right? Just go up a step, and then go up a step, right? Do it gradually. Don't impact your users. We can talk a little bit about some of the policies that we initially talked to customers about, guest user access and reviewing and stuff like that in a minute. But it all boils down to like less user impact at that level so you don't have a riot, essentially a user riot. We all know what those are like.
Yes.
They're not fun. And I feel like flexing those muscles, like building those muscles and flexing them, takes some time. I used to have the same thing when I was in the field. Customers wanted to already be in Azure, and then it's like, okay, well, if we all had magical wands, we would have all been there a number of years ago, but it doesn't work that way, unfortunately.
I like the idea of rings, relations. Like we do with Windows Insiders, where we have the very aggressive one where we'll try big changes and things may break, but people that sign up for that, they are aware that they might end up having a bricked operating system because they were trying something so new. Although I have to say that I've never got a bricked operating system.
And you need champions, right?
Yeah.
You need
champions
all across your company. And, and we all know how hard it is. Like if you deploy something or you try to make a process change, and the first thing that happens is it's annoying for the users, or they don't want to do it, or it's too much of a burden or whatever like that. You get that small group of users that becomes very vocal about this change, and it's very hard. They're the ones that go around and tell the other employees like, hey, this is not very good for our business, or not very good for our usage. So it's all about introducing those changes gradually and as frictionlessly as possible.
And I want to go back a little bit to something that you mentioned earlier. People buy things and they don't know what they bought. We have a lot of customers that have P2 right now, license for Azure Active Directory, and they don't know all the features because it's so big, right? It has so many capabilities in there that they don't know where to start. Hopefully, if you're listening to this one, you know now that identity governance is part of your license. You don't have to do anything extra, and you get all this goodness for free. You just need to go and switch it on one step at a time.
Yeah, and it's like, a lot of people ask me, it was like, how do they not know what they bought, right? And it's just like, I know that like at Microsoft, we bundle a lot of things, right? So you buy like E3 and you get all these different features that maybe you just didn't, you're like, hey, in a lot of people, it comes down to, I needed it for this one thing, right?
Yeah.
I needed it for MFA.
Yes.
Right. But at the end of the day, even if you own P1, which doesn't include like PIM and access reviews and access packages, but there's a whole lot of other things in P1 that people just don't realize comes with it.
It's true.
True. Yeah. So P1 and P2 have all this goodness in there that just sits there waiting to be used.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of your role is like educating customers.
Oh, yeah. I pitch it as like I'm almost a salesman. Like I'm almost in sales, but I'm not here to sell you licenses. I'm here to sell you on the stuff you already bought.
Makes
and
sense.
A lot of it's super simple to set up.
Makes sense.
One of my best stories that I give customers is it's not identity governance, but I'll take a short detour. But is Azure AD App Proxy. And the integration that you have with Azure AD App Proxy and mobile devices. Like a lot of people don't realize that if you do App Proxy and you publish your internal sites out to the internet or out to the internet via App Proxy, if they're on a mobile device, and they're using Edge, they can type in the internal URL and it will redirect to the external URL of the App Proxy application.
Nice.
And
I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, I don't think I was either. That's kind of an invaluable thing to go play around with. Christos, we should make that a future stream.
I know. And I assume that this needs to be an Intune device where it's been onboarded and now you can access sites.
I mean, it needs to be an Intune managed device with Edge, or it needs to have Edge with the proper policy push down. And we're not. I don't think we're too much into device management here, but there's so much you can do, and this is one of those things that's purchased with E3, right? You get into. There's so much you can do for a device without enrolling.
Yeah.
That's
true.
And that's part of what we see in the field too. Is like working. Having us work in the identity org, we kind of silo ourselves, right? And we kind of focus on the things that we want. But in the real world, I just came back from a conference where I was presenting on conditional access, but half the questions I got were about Intune. Right?
Interesting.
Yeah, customers don't approach this as like a siloed conversation, right? It's all one story to them.
Correct.
And that's why I try to advocate too, as well. It's like you have all these cool features, but you also have like Intune and endpoint management, stuff like that.
Very nice.
I know that we hit on this a little bit. What are some of the quicker ways to get started? I know you said guest user governance. Is there any other side of things that we would maybe want to spend a little bit of time talking about? Because maybe you're one of those companies that don't invite people in. Maybe there's a way for them to get started. I feel like that's just not a thing anymore, but maybe, right? Maybe there is a company out there.
So probably the best way, I'll throw the guest user scenario out the window for a minute. But the first thing that you probably would want to do as an identity or as an organization rolling out access reviews is look at all your privileged roles. You can go in the Azure portal and you can be like, oh, let me click each role and see who's assigned permanent eligibility to this role. But it's much easier just to run an access review. And what I tell customers when they're starting to roll out access reviews is do it in read-only mode. Like, you don't have to make changes.
Yeah, that's true.
Like, just get the report.
Auditing
the data is better than not.
Yes. So you can see the impact of the changes. Now, interesting question. We're talking about entities and accounts. Identity governance, does that cover highly privileged accounts that have been rolled out to do automation and execution of tasks? Or is that part of the workload identity that we're working on, which is kind of in public preview? Do you know?
I haven't dived too down into the identity workload pieces yet, but like for highly privileged service accounts, I mean, yeah, you can absolutely, do an access review for and just kind of see what it has access to.
Yeah, and that I think that's currently in public preview as well, because I did a little bit of a demo. Yeah, well, digging in a little bit of a demo recently for one of the talks I was part of. It's all in public preview, which is
public preview.
All great, because if you think about it, those accounts aren't MFA'd.
Right.
MFA-able accounts, right? So you want to have some way of seeing what those service principals or managed identities are accessing. So
exactly, you have a service principal, they can have contributor rights to your full Azure subscription, which is not uncommon for people deploying stuff. These accounts tend to be username and password or entities stored somewhere. Therefore, they're not only highly privileged, but they're also less secure because you don't have the MFA component, as you mentioned. You need to have this kind of auditing and the data to be able to manage this account as well. Very, very important.
The next scenario that we would talk about for identity governance is on the access review side is the guest access. And like I said, almost everybody comes in for that. And I tell them to begin with, like, just run the report on the guest access. And then we put a cool new checkbox in the guest access review that is like, if it's inactive within a certain period of time, that's all I want, right? You can go in there and you can say, hey, if these people haven't logged into my tenant in 365 days, just give me those users.
Yeah.
And then you can make the decision there. And that's why I call it read only, right? Get the report. And if you decide, hey, I want to redo the report and take the recommendations, right? We can do recommendations where if they haven't logged in within 30 days, it just automatically removes them. But you don't have to do that. And a lot of people think that it's comes back to boiling the ocean, right? A lot of people think that when you do this, like you have to make changes and you have to implement. And it's like, that's great if you would. I mean, it would probably help you be more secure because, of course, removing users' access to things, inherently is just going to make you more secure, even though they're going to yell at you later. But, just getting the report in general is always the best first step.
You mentioned that there are scenarios that you can get started. What about the tools available to you to get started? Is this all through PowerShell? Can people jump on the portal and have a better experience with the UI? I know that we announced the wizard. Have you had a chance to play with it?
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about how you approach these from your end.
My demonstrations with customers usually involve opening up the Azure AD portal and then walking through step by step of creating a guest access review.
Okay.
And again, it's the art of the possible. So even though like we're not going to make changes and we're not going to impact users, we still talk about it, right? Because it's, in my opinion, that's your initial walkthrough of like me explaining everything. So that way you know what that feature does when you're not on the phone with me. You're not looking up documentation. You're like, what is this? What does this field do? Right? Kind of explain all that at once.
Okay.
The identity governance wizards have made something like guest user access really simple. You log into the admin portal. I believe you guys actually have a short link.
Maybe we do.
Yeah, we do,
and we'll include it in the description. But yeah, it's extraordinarily straightforward, and it walks you through. It's almost like that sort of next that everybody's used to from the way back machine, but it's the hand-holding process of onboarding a guest user and giving them an access package.
Yep. It's great. And then after it's created, you can go into the Azure portal and you can pop in, you can open it up just like you would any normal access review. You can look at the settings. You can see what it did. But a lot of people, it's a black box for them, right? If they do it that way. So they're just doing something. They don't really understand like what every setting is doing, right? So that's where like my team comes in and helps like explain like this is all the things that it is doing.
If I have 30,000 employees running an access review on them on a read-only mode, is that going to overwhelm me with too much information to get started? Am I going to have to pour through logs and audits to be able to make sense of it, or is there a way for me to quickly discern what I need to do as the next step?
If you're just doing like a read-only report,
Mhm.
then I mean, I could see where if you're running it against so many employees, yeah, maybe you're a little overwhelmed. And
Right.
then when people start talking about the next steps is what they do, I start talking to them about, okay, instead of thinking about it as far as like your users, think about it as far as your applications and your data.
Right.
So instead of like, oh, hey, maybe now I'm going to run an access review against all my users, like maybe you've got a team site or a SharePoint site that
Yeah.
has highly classified information,
Right.
right? And maybe it's an HR Teams channel, right? Pick that channel and just run your access review against that. That'll narrow your scope down, and you'll be able to look at that list pretty quickly, and you'll be able to say, oh, who's this person? This person hasn't been in HR in a year,
Right.
you know?
Yes.
So that's where I flip it around and I say, users is doing it against users is fine, but when you're starting, doing it against resources is probably the next step.
Which
I
means
like
that you
that.
need to know your resources.
Mhm.
And that's also a good idea to start auditing what is important to you and do this threat modeling where you try to identify what is critical for your business and who should have access. Then again, another way to look into securing your resources and your enterprise. I love it.
Yeah. Now, I know you had talked about this briefly. The pandemic's changed quite a bit. Have you seen customers gravitate towards having more of these conversations, given the fact that the folks that went home in March of 2020 aren't the same people that are coming back now? Have you had more of these conversations?
Yeah, so typically speaking, when we have conversations with customers about this, like it's come down to poor communication internally for like job changes and stuff like that.
Sure.
Like, when we were all in the office, and some of us have smaller offices than others, like I don't think this happens at Microsoft.
No.
But when somebody changes roles, like maybe your HR person walked down the hallway and hopped into your IT room and was like, hey, I need this person to, get new permissions or whatever, right? And then you kind of knew, or you have a ticket submission or something like that, right?
Right.
But with everybody being remote and having different reporting branches that they go through, I think most customers have kind of lost that like hands-on, this is what's happening in my environment all the time. So we have seen an uptick in this demand simply because of that. And it makes it really easy for somebody to come in and be like, okay, a new hire comes in and they need access to, these team sites and these groups, and maybe they need access to these enterprise applications that we've set up. And instead of like, right click copying and adding them to the groups, separately in AD, just making their user and then adding them to the access package directly is becoming a more popular feature. And I know that we talk about self-service for this a lot, self-service access reviews and self-service access packages. But what I see in the field often is that unless you're like a huge enterprise customer, like most of the time this is done by the IT admin. Like the IT admin is the one creating the access packages based off requirements that they have gotten from the various different departments, and then directly assigning the user the access package. And that's totally fine too. A lot of people, because we focus so hard on the self-service piece, we miss out, I think, on the direct assignment piece. Like you as an IT admin can make these access packages, and then when a new hire starts, you just pop in there and be like, hey, give this user this access package. And it still retains all the same settings as far as like having to be renewed or revoked after a certain period of time.
Now, are the customers that you support, are they more of the smaller customers, or are they more of the big, gigantic enterprises? Or is it kind of a mixed bag?
Now it's more of the small business, commercial customers. But in a previous life, I worked in Fast Track. So
you saw the big, gigantic customers. Yeah. Very cool. Very cool. Well, I think that kind of rounds out our list of questions that we had.
Yeah.
And we definitely appreciate you taking the time out of your day. I know it's very busy to join us today for one of our podcasts. So thanks for tuning in, and thanks for joining us, Patrick.
Oh, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Of course. And Christos, thanks for being a good colleague.
Co-host. Thank you.
Co-host, colleague, co-host, all of it.
I can keep my role. Thank you very much. This was a test, friends. My annual review is coming up, and Shannon was sent to review my performance. So I'm glad I get to keep my job and speak to awesome people like Patrick and get the privilege to work with Shannon for another year. If you're listening to this one, make sure to subscribe and join us. Check our YouTube channel and check the links below to find more information about identity governance and all the things that we're doing these days in the developer advocacy team. Thank you and catch you soon.